As far as the ACC situation goes, I mean, they're obviously not in a great situation when it comes to their TV contract and the money there and how long they're locked into it. I mean, the other thing here is obviously Jim Phillips holding a playoff expansion right now. And it just comes at such an interesting time where the ACC was pretty irrelevant when it came to the playoff this past year. And then Clemson has lost an athletic director, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator coming off of said year. How alarmed should the ACC be about the spot that they're in there? Or are we just making too much out of one down year for Clemson?
Yeah, I mean, we don't know yet whether that'll turn out to be a one-off or Clemson goes right back to being Clemson. For the ACC's sake, I think they need that Clemson because there's not another program that's like right on the cusp of becoming the next Clemson. Frankly, for all the reasons you said is why a lot of us are so puzzled that Jim Phillips is taking the stance he is on the playoff. Unlike we just talked about the Big 12 and the Pac-12 having a TV negotiation coming up where they can hopefully bring in more revenue, ACC doesn't have that opportunity. They're locked in for almost 20 years. The only way they're going to substantially drive more money to their conference is either through expansion, which, there's no sense that Notre Dame's going to be joining anytime soon as a full member, or from the playoff. I mean, these conferences stand to make a substantial amount of money from the next playoff deal. And now there are people in that room that think that waiting until the contract expires, so that truly everybody is a bidder, not just ESPN, will drive that price even higher. And you take a little bit of a short-term hit for the long-term gain. But yeah, I mean, the ACC more than any of the others really needs that influx of revenue from an expanded playoff.
So what are you buying as the main reason here for what Jim Phillips' motives are? I mean, I've heard the theory, hey, trying to get an 18 playoff there was about getting Notre Dame in, right? And now, obviously the student athlete welfare. I have a hard time believing that would be the main push, but I don't, what else is really on the table there, you think, for the ACC doing this right now?
Yeah, I mean, he insists it's not about getting Notre Dame, and Jim Phillips worked at Notre Dame, so he knows better than most, why they truly value their independence. So I'll take his word for that. I just think it's a situation where you think about the schools in the ACC, Duke, Wake Forest, UVA, North Carolina, BC, very academic minded schools that are not necessarily out there, trying to win football national championships. And, Jim Phillips, the presidents of those schools are his bosses, and he's in that room representing them. And so it's not implausible to me that those presidents genuinely believe that this is not the right time to expand the playoff, that we should be solving NCAA issues, et cetera. It's, I think, working against their own interest. I mean, we had that conference call with him last Friday, and I said, Pitt, how can you be taking this stance right after Pitt won the ACC and all they really got out of it was a trip to the Peach Bowl without their star quarterback? And in this expanded playoff, they would have had an automatic bid, and I'm guessing Kenny Pickett doesn't opt out of a playoff game. So that tells you that this is a more deeply held philosophical cause for them. And I do think it's coming from the presidents more than it is from Jim Phillips himself.
But when I think about it, at least my initial reaction as a Big 12 fan was, I mean, obviously frustration, thinking, well, now here's a couple more years where this new look league is probably going to have a tougher time getting into a 14 playoff, right? But then also long-term, like, does the SEC come back actually to a bargaining table in 2026 when they're looking at a new deal? Is the SEC by that point going to go try to do their own thing? How concerned should we be in Big 12 country about the lack of playoff expansion right now?
Well, I think the good news is for the Big 12 is that Bob Bowlesby is in there fighting the good fight for the format that he helped come up with. He's not one of the ones. In fact, he said, he had a quote out of fairly recently, because, Kevin Warren from the Big Ten is hung up on, he thinks that the Power 5 conferences should have it written in that they have automatic berths. And Bowlesby said, if any conference could really use that right now, it's us. And we're not pushing for it because we don't think that's right for the sport. And also not right for getting this thing approved. So he's on the right side of it, if you will. And at the end of the day, the ACC doesn't have much leverage. So if this thing is just going to run its course, and they're starting from scratch in 2026, the ACC is not going to be dictating what that format looks like. The SEC and Big Ten will drive it. I think the Pac-12 and the Big 12 are very closely aligned with Greg Sankey on it. And then you just say the ACC, well, do you want to be part of it or not? And the answer is going to be yes, we want to be part of it.
So switching gears here a little bit, Stewart, I think one of the other things that to me was so encouraging about the Big 12's year overall for the new league is the fact that you made it through the craziest coaching cycle carousel that I have seen certainly in my lifetime. And you made it through without losing Matt Campbell, Luke Fickell, Dave Aranda, like some of these names in the new look conference that were really hot coaching targets. How wild is it when you step back at the end of the day and think about all those jobs that were open and the Big 12 did not lose those guys?
I mean, it's so much of the coaching carousel is timing. If Luke Fickell's team is not in playoff contention going into the last week of the season, I think he's the coach of Notre Dame right now. Notre Dame didn't want to wait on him, and so they promoted Marcus Freeman, who a year earlier was working for Luke Fickell. So good break there. I do think Matt Campbell was in line to be the USC coach if Lincoln Riley had said no, but Lincoln Riley said yes. So, they dodged some bullets there. And then, at that point, I'm now kind of expecting Luke Fickell to be there for a while. One of the jobs he might have been up for is might have wanted to go for is Penn State, and James Franklin signed a huge extension. I don't think he's rushing to get out of there. Certainly, I don't think Matt Campbell is rushing to get out of Iowa State. USC might have been too hard to pass up, but also he didn't have a great season last year, so his stock may be cooling off a little bit. So, they did very well on that front as well. There was a moment I thought Kalani Sitake might be up for the Oregon job. That didn't happen either. So a lot of stability with those schools.
Yeah, and speaking of USC and that job, obviously Lincoln Riley goes and kind of leaves Oklahoma hanging, and Sooner fans certainly have some thoughts about that. And Brent Venables comes into OU. As a fan of somebody else in the league, my thought is, well, I would rather take on Brent Venables and Dylan Gabriel than I would Caleb Williams and Lincoln Riley. Where do you think Oklahoma is headed here with Brent Venables and going into the SEC? Are they in as good a place as they were with Lincoln Riley before?
It's hard to say that. Lincoln Riley had so much success there, and it's not just losing him, as you alluded to. The quarterback that was going to be the quarterback of the future for the next 2 years, and a guy who has a talent to be the number one pick eventually. That's a huge loss. Dylan Gabriel's a nice quarterback, but that's not close in my opinion. And so their roster is in real turmoil right now. And so so when you say what's the future, I mean, Brent Venables may ultimately be a very successful coach there, have them ready for the SEC. I think they're in for a rough patch, at least this year, and which is unusual. Like, we're so used to Oklahoma being a consistent playoff contender, and with who they've lost on their roster, and as of this moment, not a lot coming in via the portal outside of Gabriel. I have a hard time. I had a hard time deciding whether to even put them in my early top 25. So there's a chance for some of the other schools to take advantage of a window right now.
Well, finally, Stewart, before I let you go, I know you wore the purple, which I appreciate today. Adrian Martinez is transferring to K-State. Is there any chance that K-State can kind of curb the turnover problems that Adrian Martinez has had plaguing him throughout his career?
Adrian Martinez has always had the talent. At some point, I think he started to suffer from some confidence issues, and the same thing happening over and over and over. And so when the season ended, I thought, before we knew he was going to K-State, so the best thing for all parties here is a fresh start. Nebraska needs to move on from the Adrian Martinez era, and Adrian Martinez needs to move on from Nebraska. So yes, to answer your question, yes, I think just benefiting from a change in scenery, a good coaching staff, I think that he can have success there. And I think his ceiling is certainly lower than what maybe people thought earlier in his career, but he's talented. And if they didn't have him, gosh, they went 3-9, and I shudder to think what they would have been without him, because often he was the only thing they had going on offense.
How much will it take to get some legitimate Heisman buzz for Deuce Vaughn next year?
That's a great question. I think just in terms of his talent and abilities, he's that kind of player for sure. the Heisman has become intertwined with the playoff race. It's very hard to be in contention for that if you're not on one of the teams that's at least in contention till the end. And, that's why I think we're seeing a run of Alabama players, for one thing, because they're always in the mix. Joe Burrow won it, leading his team to the national title. So what kind of season it's not so much what would Deuce Vaughn have to do, it's what kind of season would Kansas State have to have. And I think it would have to be a season kind of like the year Colin Klein almost won it, where they're in the mix for the national championship until very late.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. Stewart, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for taking the time here. Enjoy your work, and we'll continue to watch as the offseason evolves.
All right. Thanks so much for having me.